Hello, welcome to another podcast of Wingfield and Kastning. Today we're going to be discussing a topic that, for lack of a better term, we refer to as unplayability, as it applies to our individual instruments and how we approach them. I have not played a concert in the past few years where someone doesn't come up to me afterwards and ask, how do you play those? Because they're very unconventional and seemingly physically awkward and a challenge to play. And Mark, even you will ask me from time to time, how do you play those things?
Yeah, because they do look kind of impossible to play. In fact, when I pick up one of your instruments, the multi-course ones, I can't imagine how they're played, how you play them. So how you manage to play these things, which I think for most people you just pick it up and you think, well, this isn't possible. Um, how have you? I guess you must have had to develop new techniques and new approaches. Talk a bit about that.
Well, you're right. They're not playable, and I don't play them very well at all. To answer that question,
Hmm.
uh, it's been an evolutionary process. I didn't just start with my main instrument is the 36 string double contra guitar, and I didn't just start with that. Like it didn't just happen. I didn't go from 6 string to 36 string. The 36 string double contra guitar has two sets of 18 strings. The contra guitar on the 30 string contra alto guitar has a 12 string set of alto strings and an 18 string set of contra guitar strings. So those 18 string sides have a nut width of about 3 3/4, which is about 2.5 times the width of a normal 6 string guitar.
Yeah.
So I play those in a cello position because in a horizontal standard position, I can't get my hand all the way around the neck. And in a cello position, my thumb comes out from behind the fingerboard and
Yeah.
plays, everything, and even becomes a fifth finger a lot of the times because I'll play chord voicings with my thumb and fingers.
So that must have been quite a big thing to teach your thumb to start playing as a fifth finger on the fretboard.
Right. It was a challenge, but at
Mm,
the same time, as soon as I started doing it, it felt exactly natural on those
mm,
instruments. Like that was exactly what needed to happen.
interesting. Yeah.
So from there, it was just a matter of practicing like mad and learning it.
Mm,
Um, and on top of that, so there's three different contra guitars right there between the 30 and the 36 have a total of three 18 string instruments in them, and each one has a different tuning.
yeah.
And on top of that, there are about 2 dozen tunings at present that I use on them. So they're not just in the same tuning all the time. So moving into a cello position was really natural for those instruments because they're just so big. I mean, you've seen them in person. It's hard to get a sense of how big they are without actually seeing them in person.
Yeah.
The necks are just massive. The scale length is much longer. Like a normal guitar scale is around 25 to 25.5 inches. Contra guitar scale is 30 inches. So
Mm,
that places the frets much further apart. So not only do you have more strings to navigate, but the frets are much farther apart. So you have much more of a stretch between the frets to try to reach as well.
yeah. So I mean, I guess you've been doing, like you were saying, you've been doing it for playing guitars with a wider than normal necks for a while, and it's gradually gone up. So I guess you
Right.
must have started with some of the techniques early on, and you've just developed it and developed it. So maybe it's been a kind of a gradual thing. But
It's
how do you get the pressure on the strings? Because some of this, I mean, first of all, you've got your thumb on the top. Second of all, some of those strings are so big around that it must
right.
be quite hard to really get them to hold them
And
down.
it's all right. And they're all double courses. There's no
Yeah,
single courses on there. So that's working against you as well because not only do you have to press down the string, you have to press down both strings at the same time and
yeah,
cleanly.
yeah,
And you're right. The like the low B gauge is a 130, which is pretty massive,
yeah,
and that ranges all the way up to either a 9 or 10, pretty widely different gauges.
yeah,
So from there, it was something I was used to, like that, how that felt,
Yeah.
and or like your attack and your finger placement. Um, it just evolved to match those as the instruments evolved, my technique had to evolve to keep up with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And the right hand
It
as
was
well. I mean, you must have had to develop a lot on that in order to just navigate all those courses of strings with the hand.
right. I don't use picks,
Yeah.
and I very often, as you know, play on the 30 and the 36. I'll play both sets of strings with my right hand,
Mm.
so I'm not always moving from one side to the other side like two clearly delineated instrument halves.
Yeah.
It's one big instrument for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was and is a challenge. I'm still learning. I'm still
Mm.
developing things, and I still run into things that are new for me.
Yeah.
Um, and I have a big notebook just crammed full of notes and scores and things that I've
Mm.
been working on and am working on.
Yeah. Interesting.
Pickups, you're using all hex pickups on your guitar, right? You drive the VG88 is all
That's
hex.
that is all hex, and it needs to be because it processes each string separately, and that's part of the great thing about it. In fact, that's probably one of the biggest differences between it and another processor is if you add some, say, distortion to each string separately, you get a different effect than if you add it to all six at the same time, because they combine together in a much nicer way, and um, you can just do much more when you're dealing with one string at a time in terms of crafting the sound than you can if you're trying to deal with just a mono everything all in signal.
Right.
Um,
Instead of just sort of broadly painting your sound with one effect.
that's right. You can really go and craft it really carefully, and that I have spent a lot of time doing that. Although I haven't actually changed the patches in the VG very much in years, because I found sounds I like, and most of the sounds I change in recent years have been laptop sounds, adding to that sound or painting a backdrop behind it, which is another thing I do on the laptop, is to generate soundscapes of chords based on single notes that I play into the laptop and things like that.
Right.
Which I guess that in a way ties back into what you do, because I've done that because I needed to find a way to be able to create chords which weren't possible to play on the guitar.
Right.
Um,
Right.
because most of the chords you can play on the guitar, I don't like the voicing on a normal six-string guitar. Or normally, I mean, I tune in all fourths, but it's similar. It's not much different from a normal guitar tuning. And yeah, I just don't like this. I like some of them, but not a percentage. I'd say I like maybe 20-30% of the voicings, and the rest I don't like.
Mhm.
For most purposes. Sometimes they're perfect, but depends on the music. And the voicings that I tend to hear tend to be more pianistic or orchestral, and they're not possible to play on the guitar. And so the laptop allows me to get those voicings. And I guess for you, it must be a similar thing with why you've developed all these different instruments and tunings and things. Tell me a bit about that, the tuning side of things.
Right. Well, it originated with compositional requirements. I was writing and conceiving of compositions that had no chance of existing because the instruments to realize those didn't exist. So that's where all of these instruments came from. They were just all based on compositional evolution and what was required. And a lot of them now, I can play things involving more than 18 voices in a chord simultaneously
Mm.
on either instrument. So, and on the extended classical, up to 15 notes and 15 voices in a single chord,
Yeah.
uh, which can't even, I mean, you couldn't even easily do that on piano unless you were using the sustain pedal.
Yeah.
Um, so that allows me, um, like if you imagine looking at an orchestra on stage, and if you were composing for that orchestra, you would use orchestrational techniques. You would say, I want this piece, this part to be first violins and oboes.
Mm.
So that's going to give you a specific color and texture. And it's similar with what I'm doing with tunings.
Yeah.
I have several dozen tunings that I use on the contra guitars based on um, the project, based on the pieces. For example, I'll use different tunings on our recording dates than I would for solo recording
Yeah.
dates.
So how do you
Just based
keep
on
all those in your head? I mean, how do you? Because oftentimes, if we're playing in the studio or live, you'll have well, in the studio anyway, you'll have more than one instrument there,
right.
and sometimes even in the middle of a piece, you'll pick up another one, or in between pieces, whatever. It's completely then the other instrument's got a completely different tuning. How do you? Because to me that seems kind of a mystery. It seems, in fact, almost impossible to conceive of how you keep all those tunings in your head and understand how to do something with that on the neck. I mean, for me, it would take years to relearn one of those tunings, let alone think, oh, I've got a bunch of different ones here. I think I'll pick up another guitar, and there I go.
Right.
How do you do that? Is that just the way your brain works, or have you developed kind of systems for thinking about it? How do you do that?
No, it just comes really natural to me. That's just
Yeah,
how I hear things. And
yeah,
I think of it in terms of, so for example, let's take the 30 string and the 36 string, which are always in my instrument rack on
yeah,
any recording. So between those two instruments, I have three contra guitars, and therefore I have three contra guitar tunings. Um, one of them will usually be in like octaves and unisons,
yeah,
although that's going to be changing soon. But and one of them may be in a more broad, sort of a broader, widely spaced tuning, like thirds and sixths, and another one may be in really close, like sort of a harmonically dense tuning, like in seconds or ninths or sevenths,
hmm,
just really closely voiced. So that accomplishes several things. It allows for colors and textures that couldn't happen any other way. And I just think in terms of colors and textures, and by textures I mean harmonic densities,
yeah.
um, and fabric of chords and harmonic environments. Um,
Well, that would
and
be
it,
really interesting to go into that in detail in another podcast. But sticking to the topic, it's not really a challenge for you so much that as say the physical side of it because you find that kind of natural. Am I right about that? That
yeah, it's
looking at the yeah,
right. I mean, you've mentioned that lately, I think like in our last recording session that we did for the album that would become the Line to Three,
yeah,
I would swap instruments on one piece,
yeah,
and it felt like reaching for a different paint color. If I was a
yeah,
painter, like I
yeah,
could be using red, and now I want blue.
yeah,
It's not just changing for the sake of changing. It's
yeah,
I have one harmonic fabric in play, and now I need to move to this other one
yeah,
to achieve like I almost don't think of them as separate instruments, really. I think of them
yeah,
as just one big instrument,
yeah,
like just one big orchestra. So I'm using different sections in the orchestra,
yeah,
and I know what the tunings are, and I know
yeah.
exactly the harmonic density and the chord voicings that are going to
Mm,
happen with each
mm,
tuning.
yeah, yeah. Interesting.
So I notice sometimes when you're playing, you have some pretty unorthodox left hand things that I see you doing, like uh, very slow bends, or sometimes you'll do things where you slide down into a note or you'll slide up into a note, which is not revolutionary. I've heard other people do that, but I've not heard other people do it like you do it. And I'm not describing it very well, but
Mm,
you can have a really wide vibrato that's extremely controlled. It's not just this wide warbling kind of thing. It's almost um, like you're moving between pitches instead of doing a vibrato on a single pitch. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does. I mean, vibrato is something I've worked really hard on because I hear vibratos that I like, and they're usually not on the guitar. I mean, it's not that I don't like the normal vibrato on the guitar; can sound great, but the vibrato that really attracted my ear was more the kind of thing that a sax or a singer would do. And to get that effect on the guitar, you have to just really take a very different approach to vibrato. And yeah, so I really to find a way. It took me actually years to find out how to get that sound, that type of effect, and I realized in the end that what it really was partly the width of the vibrato movement, but also the velocity curve, if that makes any sense, of the
Yeah, sure.
vibrato. In other words, you think of a vibrato as like a kind of a sine wave that goes kind of up and down like this. Well,
Hmm.
that is the usual kind of guitar thing, and that just does not give you that effect at all. You need to get something that's more like a triangle wave, something that moves from the unbent pitch to the bent pitch really, really quickly, and
Hmm.
then comes down maybe also very quickly, or maybe slightly slower, or the other way around. It goes up slow and comes down, but controlling the shape of the velocity of the pitch was the key to getting different kinds of effects and different, getting something more like a reed instrument would do or a voice would do. So that's why it's sometimes wide because it's necessary in order to get that to happen. And sometimes if you're doing a very, it's changing pitch for a very short period of time. In order to get it to sound, you have to move it a long way. But
Right.
yeah, um,
But it's also the speed of it, right? I mean, I hear a lot of guitarists just, and even classical violinists fall into this trap where you'll hear them do a vibrato that sounds like it's being done by a machine. It's just the speed and the pitch variation are fixed, and it
yeah.
is
Well, yeah. To my
very
ears,
much of a constant.
yeah. To my ears, I always really liked vibrato that was in time with the music. It just made sense to me that it should be in time and that it should be a normal musical value. An eighth note, a quarter note, a triplet, but it should be some musical value. And to me, that's just what I heard. I mean,
Right.
sometimes I don't do that, but it's only as a kind of an effect. Like a quavering kind of sound. I might do that, which isn't in time, but that's something it is a type of vibrato, but it's something that's more of a kind of a yeah. It's something that's an exception for me. Most of what I do is strictly in time because to me it has a musical value. The
Mhm.
the timing of a vibrato to my ears is part of the rest of music, and music is all about the time as well as the pitch. And so to divorce the two to me doesn't sound as musical as thinking of them. It's just another part of the musical expression. Therefore, why would it suddenly let go of tempo? If you see what I mean.
Sure.
So yes, this just seems so natural to me. But it was hard. I mean, I had to work hard on that because it's hard to get something that's really in time. You have to used to really put the work in and practice it. But yeah, so there's and what you were saying about the rest of it with the sliding and all the rest of it and bending and things. Yeah, a lot of what I play, I guess, is unconventional and um, it comes from the same place as a vibrato for me. It's stuff I hear. I'll hear something in my head, or I'll listen to a sax player, or a vocalist, or a violinist, or other instruments other than the guitar, and I'll hear something that they do, and I'll just think I'd love to be able to get a sound like that because I just feel that. That's what I'd like to. That's what I feel when I'm playing. I feel that, and I don't know how to make it happen, but I hear a flute player or a sax player do it, and I want to have that. So I've spent a lot of time working on how can I make that happen, and what it comes down to is a lot of you can make it happen with a lot of unconventional kind of slides. Again, it's sometimes very similar to the vibrato in that a very quick slide that you don't make a big deal out of. It's not like a great huge slide. It's just a very quick little one creates
Hmm.
an effect, uh, an approach to the note which gets away from the guitaristic thing. And not that I'm doing it for that reason, but that's what singers and sax players are kind of doing all the time because it's natural to that instrument to do that, to kind of move up into every note or sometimes to go down into the note. It's just the way those instruments work, and with a guitar or a violin, whereas a guitar it isn't naturally that way, and so it took quite a lot of work to kind of get that into my vocabulary. And yeah, there's all kinds of slurring going on, and a lot of tremolo arm, which I like to call the pitch bar, um,
Right.
where I actually move the pitch as I'm holding the note. I'll move the pitch down to another note and hold it there, and maybe to a third, or even play a melodic phrase by moving the arm to different pitches and holding. And yeah, that took a lot of practice. But again, it was something I heard and something that is an influence really from Indian classical singing that came from originally. Um, so yeah, it's all those things are natural to me in the sense that I heard them and really felt them, but trying to get them to happen on the guitar was years of working at it gradually. And yeah, I'm always working on something, and it oftentimes, I don't know if it's the same with you, but I'm always working. Well, you said it was a minute ago actually, and it's always working on something new. There's always
Right.
something I can hear which I can't do yet, and I've got to find a way of doing it. I think, oh, it could happen this way, and then I'm going to have to try to really work to make that happen. And sometimes it'll take years just to get some new area of phrasing or tone or something to open up for
Right.
me. And sometimes I'll work on something and it takes me, I'll work on it for a year or longer and then realize it's just not going to happen. And I have to give up on that. It's not always possible, but I'm always trying to get something that's going on in my head.
Mhm.
Is that similar with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's everything that you mentioned with just sort of mechanics and articulation and
Yeah.
touch, dynamics, and then I have all the tunings piled on top of that as well.
So tell me how do you approach vibrato?
When I went to the cello position, I had to start over from scratch,
Hmm.
like nothing. I'd spent years developing a vibrato in like a classical guitar posture,
Yeah.
um, and then once I switched to having everything vertical in cello position, nothing worked anymore for vibrato.
Hmm.
So to I had to not only relearn it, but I had to relearn it as it applies to the carbon fiber instruments because they have such crazy sustain.
Hmm.
On a wood acoustic guitar, that note starts falling off as soon as you attack it.
Yeah.
On a fiber instrument, if you have the right vibrato, you can just make it go for a very long time.
Yeah.
Um, so I had to really learn how to physically and mechanically make it work
Hmm.
in a cello position, and I stole it from cellists. I started watching all the cellists I could at concerts, and
Yeah.
um, so it's really adapted from a left-hand cello vibrato,
Yeah.
and from there it's still evolving actually because I keep learning different things that I can do, especially on the carbon fiber instruments. They're just
Hmm.
so responsive.
Hmm.
The tiniest vibrato gesture is really becomes very apparent.
Yeah.
Things that would just be lost on a wood guitar are almost magnified on carbon fiber instruments.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an ongoing process.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? There's a lot of different ways of doing vibrato, and yeah, from looking at other instruments and how they do it, really worth doing. I think
Right.
a lot of times I see guitar players, the students that I have, and they're just going at the vibrato in whatever way happens to occur to them. But yeah, actually, there's so much there, and you have to find a way that works for you, and you also have to. In my case, I've got how many different ways I've got it? One, two, three, four, at least four different ways of doing vibrato that are in completely distinct ways of doing it. Um,
Well, I think
and
you really hit on
it,
saying that you have to find what works for you, but I think you have to know what you're going for. Like, what do you
exactly.
want?
That's exactly it. I mean, exactly. If you know what sounds you want, and then you sort of find the way that really makes that sound happen, and not just go with what you happen to be doing.
Right.
I think that's a kind of a something I think maybe we both share is that we tend to well, I wouldn't say stop at nothing, but really endeavor to try and make the sounds we hear happen on the instrument somehow by doing whatever is necessary to make it happen. Um, I think that's probably got a lot to do with both of our playing and why we play the way we do, why we sound the way we do. Because um, if I,
And fits together.
yeah, it does. I think if I stopped at a hurdle because I thought, oh, that's too hard or whatever, I'd never be doing it half of what I do. And I think for students and players, young players, it's really worth thinking about the fact that a lot of the limitations you think are there aren't necessarily really there. If you
That's
just
right.
don't have that in your head that, oh, that's too hard or that's not possible. A lot of
Yep.
it's, if you sometimes you have to find another way to make it happen. You find a kind of ergonomically clever way to make something that otherwise would be impossible happen. And sometimes you just have to put in some silly amount of time to make it happen. But if you really hear it,
Yep.
it's just worth doing. It's always worth it because it will be,
Right.
it will be something that's part of you if you've really pushed yourself beyond the usual obvious approaches, if you see what I mean, to playing the instrument.
Right. And when I started working with Alistair Hay at Emerald Guitars in Ireland, that makes all of my, the carbon fiber instruments that I use, which is all my main instruments now.
Mm.
There was a couple of times when we were designing the 18-string version of the contra guitar that he said, "Are you going to be able to play this?" Because it hadn't been done before, and in the design diagrams, the neck looked like it was this wide.
Yeah,
Uh, but I said, "Yeah, I will play it. I'm not
yeah.
sure how, but it just took a lot of shedding, a lot of hours."
I think that's the
Just
thing, isn't it? It's
a
having the attitude of like, I will make it happen.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's really certainly for guitarists striving to be better players, young guitarists or of any age that are thinking, oh, I really want to become good on this instrument or learn this instrument, or whatever your stage you're at. Just that, I think that attitude of you're going to make it happen, whatever. I mean, a lot of times I had this almost, uh, you know, obsessive idea of I don't care what I have to go through. I'll go through
Right.
whatever it takes, even if it's just, putting myself through, some insane amount of work to get to this thing. And then, yeah, it took a lot of work, but it didn't take as much as you think. And I think often what stops you is, I mean, sometimes it did. Sometimes it took years to develop things, but a lot of the time it just took that attitude of, I'm just going to make this happen, and you realize, actually, you know, I didn't have to make such a big deal out of it. And I think a lot of times people think, oh, that's not going to happen because they try for a bit and it seems too hard, and they think, oh, it will take me 100 years. But actually, just the attitude of, I'm going to make it happen, whatever. It's just enough to push you through that psychological barrier of, you know, actually putting in the work to make it happen, which, yeah.
Right.
I mean, you have to be
Okay.
prepared to fail too. Like I said, sometimes I
Sure.
really spend a lot of time on something and it doesn't work, and I just think, okay, well, you know, that one didn't work, but the next one will. So yeah,
Right. I think you just have to find your own path once you've decided. Again, like we said for vibrato, you have to know what you want. You have to know
yeah,
what you're going.
yeah,
And I think that's a big piece of it as well. Like once you have something concrete in mind, that's half the battle, and then
yeah,
it's just moving toward it is the rest of the
yeah,
battle.
yeah. That would be a great thing to do a podcast on. Actually, I think another one is how you do know what you want, how to find out what you want, or how
Yeah.
to develop your imagination and listening inner ear. Yeah, that would be a
Yeah.
good
That
one.
would be. Yeah.
Well,
So do we want to wrap this one up?
let's wrap this one up. So I hope everybody, I guess if you're still listening, you found it somewhat interesting. I certainly hope it was interesting. And if you have questions or you want us to talk about anything else specific, just do let us know, and we're happy to, if we can, incorporate it into a future podcast. So
Yeah.
that's it for us for now. See you next time.
Thanks.